Welcome to the Hope After Child Loss podcast, where we endeavor to offer stories of hope to grieving parents and siblings so that they might rediscover a life filled with meaning, purpose, and hope. We invite you to come and join us. Hey guys, welcome to the Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm your host, Greg Buffkin, and we are so glad you could join us for today's episode. My guest today is Sara Emmerson. So Sara, thank you so much for joining us today. We are really glad to have you as our guest.
Oh, Greg, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here in this space with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it as well. So Sara, why don't you take a few minutes and just tell us a little about yourself? And if you want to talk about your family or just whatever you want to tell us.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I live in Geneva, Illinois, and I have been here for about 20 years. I live here with my husband, Todd, and our anniversary is in September. We will have been married 20 years, which is exciting.
Congratulations.
And we have, thank you. Yeah, I know. It's a surprise to us too. We're like, wow, we made it. But we have a 16-year-old named Lincoln and who plays hockey and keeps us busy, and a 12-year-old named Lila, and she is a social butterfly, plays soccer and basketball and has lots of fun with her friends. And so between both of them and our Bernedoodle, Gunner, who is a COVID addition, as my husband calls him, our COVID addition, but he keeps us all busy too. But those things are the hub of our home. They keep everything exciting and interesting. And then beyond that, we are involved in our church. And then also I am a professional life and business coach. And I get to coach people in all areas of life, whether it has to do with their career or their spiritual walk with God or their grief or their business. And so I like to say that I specialize in helping people through the messy middle of life, whatever that is for them.
That sounds like a really interesting work.
It is. I've been blessed to be able to make that my career and to help other people really identify what God has called them to, helping them understand that they have been called for a purpose and that that their purpose is to live that out. And so helping them to see that, to identify it, and then to strategize towards it and take steps with accountability. That's where I come in. Yay, the accountability
Steps
part.
with accountability.
Yes, we have a lot of fun doing it. And I'm overjoyed to see the results that are happening in these people's lives. So it's
that's just really important work. So many people need that, but they don't really know how to do that on their own. Sometimes they just need somebody to walk beside them and just coach them into that purpose.
Yeah. I know that I know it's so important, not because I do it as much. I do hear that from my clients, how important it is to them, but I have experienced it firsthand. If it wasn't for people that had walked alongside me through really difficult seasons in my life and career, I wouldn't be where I am today. So seeing the skill that I had and matching that with the passion helped me recognize that I had a responsibility to live this out, to help overflow onto people the love and joy that God had given me. And so I absolutely adore walking alongside people in that way.
And I'm sure that they pick up on that instantly. Is that?
Hopefully, I hope that they say they do. So I hope they
I suspect if you've been at it for 20 years, there's probably a reason for that.
Yeah. Either that or I'm just a gluttony for pain. I don't know. I'm just
kidding.
Well,
there could be that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, it could. But I would say it probably wouldn't be growing and they wouldn't come back if that was the case.
I think you're not giving yourself enough credit.
No, it is. It's growing and I'm excited to continue step alongside people in that way. Yeah.
So I want to circle back to something you said a few minutes ago when you were talking about your family. Just out of curiosity, what's a Bernedoodle?
What's a Bernedoodle? Great question. He is a part Bernese Mountain Dog and part Poodle. So he's a miniature when he's like 30
Oh,
pounds.
wow.
If you go on Instagram, you can see some pictures of him. He has his own little Instagram account. I'm not super faithful on posting, but it's called Gunner's Groupies.
Gunner's Creepies. Okay.
And Gunner's Groupies. Yep. And he was a tricolored mini Bernedoodle when we got him, but just like 2020, Greg, everything didn't turn out the way you thought. And he faded. And now he's like salt and pepper gray. And we're like, well, it's because he was born in 2020. Everything turned gray in 2020.
Isn't that the truth?
So, yeah, but he is so much fun and a really good little buddy.
Wow.
And yeah, we enjoy spending time with him and playing with him in the park and taking him on walks. And he likes to follow me around. He tried to follow me in here today. I was like, no, bud, you're going to bark. I know it. You got to stay out there.
Well, our lab likes to do that sometimes when I'm doing this. The only problem is sometimes she falls asleep and starts snoring, and it can be really aggravating.
Well, good news. At least it's the dog, and the people you're interviewing don't think you have fallen asleep on them and that you're snoring at their stories. So
hopefully that would be worse. Yeah, that's very true. Hopefully they can distinguish the difference.
That would be worse. Right. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Sara, a moment ago when you were talking about your coaching and the people that you work with, sometimes you talked about how sometimes you work with them when they're going through some very difficult or dark seasons of life. Mm-hmm. And I know that for you and your husband, quite a few years ago, you had one of those seasons that you guys didn't see coming either. Can you go back and walk us through that period of your lives when you lost your son, Tate?
Yeah, it would be an honor to. For me, thinking back, Tate would have been 18 in just 2 weeks, May 27th. And so thinking back to that many years ago, and in that season, we were newly married. We'd been married about a year and a half when we found out that we were pregnant. And the first year of marriage wasn't easy. It was actually really tough for us. And so when we found out we were pregnant, I think in my mind, I'd have to ask Todd about this, but in my mind, it was this hope and healing that God was bringing in a story that I was hoping for redemption. Yeah. And in a season where it already had felt really hard. And so there was a lot of excitement around the pregnancy. It was a really sweet time in our extended family too, because my brother had found out that he was, him and his wife at the time, they were pregnant and having a little one. And so just the excitement of babies and of the new life, it was really a sweet refreshment in what felt like a desert, honestly. And so we were excited about that, and everything was seemingly going well and in the pregnancy. And then around 18, 19 weeks in the pregnancy, our doctors got some tests back and said that some things looked concerning and they wanted me to come in. And so started meeting with the doctors, and they had found out very quickly that something was wrong, but they didn't know exactly what was wrong. And so they put me in the hospital on bed rest, and a bunch of I just remember tons of doctors coming in and doing tests, and my husband and I being concerned, but also really hopeful. At this point in my life, I had been very fortunate to grow up in a Christian family, and everything had pretty much turned out well, except for that first really tough year of marriage. Everything that had kind of gone my way. I believed in Jesus. I loved Jesus. I was working at church. I was a pastor. I was working in production and creative arts and coaching and leading people and services. And so I was like looking at life going, oh, everything's going to be fine. And so even though the doctors were trying to figure out this really tricky situation, it didn't seem devastating to me because I just had this underlying sense of hope. And so they finally figured out that I had a blood clotting disorder. It's actually an autoimmune disorder called antiphospholipid syndrome. And you create blood clots in between the placenta and the uterus, and it sends you into labor. And at this point, there wasn't much they could do because the treatments that they would give us back then, 18 years ago, was blood thinners, which was, I mean, this is getting more medical, but for some people that might have dealt with this, it would have sent me into labor too. So they were just kind of like, it was a waiting game. Like, can we wait this out kind of thing? And so they kept me in the hospital, and I was there for almost a month.
Wow.
And and so that was a really tricky season. My husband, I mean, it's in the middle of the summer. My husband designs and sells swimming pools for his job, and he is completely commissioned. So you're newly married. Your husband is hustling, trying to work so that you can provide for your family and these hospital bills and a new baby. You already have a strained relationship on some level. We had tons of people to come and help support us and stuff, but at some level, they can come and sit with me in the hospital, but nobody was able to fix what was going on, which is what everyone wanted.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, that can be a tough place to find yourself when you've got so many things converging at one time like that, and none of it that you expected. And none of us grow up really understanding that we're going to face challenges like that at some point in our lives. And so we don't really come equipped knowing how to deal with it. It becomes on the job training, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would say you're definitely right. Like, for most of the people that I grew up with, they didn't have to experience that kind of trauma. Like it was traumatic to figure. But I was very privileged and protected, I would say. And so I do know friends that have had to figure that stuff out a lot earlier. But for me, this was the first time that I felt like there was a threat to the bubble that I had perceived was there. And I think that's a good way of saying it. It wasn't that it never was there. It's just I didn't perceive it before that.
Yeah, I think that happens to a lot of us, Sarah. I think we, especially if we grow up, in the Christian community, and we're in church from our earliest memories. I think sometimes there is unfortunately a perspective that, if we got a relationship with God and we do all the right things, it's sort of a formulaic approach to life, that things are going to work out well, and that things that are that traumatic happen to other people, but they don't happen to us. We observe and we know that it's bad, but we don't have any experience with it, and we just don't believe that it's really going to happen to us. And then when it happens, I think sometimes it challenges our faith, and I think it sometimes can rock what we thought was a solid foundation. Would that be fairly accurate for you?
Oh, it's completely accurate. I mean, for me, I remember being in the hospital room, and we had a little book that visitors would sign in on and come in and visit, and tons of people from church would come and pray. And so in my mind, there was still this like solid foundation of, well, everything's going to be fine. Right. I believe in Jesus. I work at a church. All of these people are praying. I thought, in my mind, the worst thing that could happen was that he would be born early and might have some struggles. But I didn't even let myself go to the emotion of, well, this could take a turn for the worst. I think I was really sheltering myself from that. I just couldn't imagine feeling that. And Greg, often what I work with a lot of my clients on is when we're unwilling to think about things, or we say, I never could do that. I don't know about you, but when you go through something hard, like people would come to me and say, I could never go through what you've been through. And I'm like, It's not like I had
Exactly.
a choice. Like nobody was like, hey, could you do this? But for many of us, we shy away from things in life, mainly for the number one reason is we can't imagine feeling a feeling. Yeah. We just can't imagine having that kind of depth of grief. And so we don't let our brain even go to it. And so really helping people understand how they can, in a healthy way, accept those feelings, give space for them and work through them has really generated or has been generated out of the fact that I wasn't willing. At that point, I probably had been in the hospital for a couple weeks. I was probably at like 21 weeks, about halfway through the pregnancy. And a few more weeks go by, a couple more weeks, and my mom was scheduled to come in to town. It was Memorial Day weekend, and she was going to come and hang with me and my husband, and that had been planned for a long time. And which at the time felt ironic, and it wasn't. God knew.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so she was scheduled to come into town, and I remember the morning she got there, before she got there, a friend of mine was picking her up at the airport. I was opening my Bible, and I don't suggest doing Bible studies like this, but I did on this day. And I just opened up my Bible and I pointed to a verse and I read it, just hoping for something. And in that verse, it said, "And the mother mourned her child." And I very quickly shut the Bible. And I had never seen that verse before, never wanted to see it again. But in that moment, I really think God was like, hey, Sarah, there's thoughts and feelings that you haven't been willing to even entertain that you're going to need to, and was kind of giving me some foreshadowing. And I wasn't willing to hear it. I was like, oh, gosh, that was a bad choice. I should not have done that. And just kind of put the Bible away and didn't want to acknowledge it or think about it or even talk to anyone about it. But I could tell physically something was different. Like I didn't feel well. Something was going on. And I kept telling that to the nurses and to my husband. And when my mom got there, I was like, something's going on. And so they finally got a hold of the specialists, and the doctors came in and they took me down and did an ultrasound. And gosh, I remember that room. Even thinking about it today, I remember that room so vividly, and the sweet ultrasound tech that was in there with my husband and I and my mom, and a friend of mine was in the room too. And the ultrasound woman was doing the ultrasound, and she just started crying, and she had to leave the room. And the doctor walked in immediately, obviously, and he very kindly said, I'm really sorry, but what we have been hoping wouldn't happen is, and your son is going to be born today, but he's not going to make it.
Oh, good gracious. So what do you do when you get news like that?
You know, honestly, Greg, I don't know about you, but in moments of that complete trauma, and that's exactly what it was, a complete traumatic moment, the only thing I could do is you almost go out of body. Like your mind, you're almost like you're watching a movie happen, and this isn't really happening to me. So your heart is trying to catch up to your mind, and you're almost going tactical, practical. So obviously you break down emotionally. And in that moment, I'm just in traumatic sorrow, but in a begging situation to the doctor. Like at this point, I'm trying to think of all of the things that I've read online that I could give him. I'm going to give him a suggestion, and he's going to go, "Oh, we haven't thought of that. Let's try that instead." And no, that wasn't the case. And so you go into that bargaining moment, into the denial of it. And then just the resignation of like, there's nothing I can do but step forward. I don't want to step forward, but I have to. At this point, I was being wheeled forward. They wouldn't let me walk. So, started heading toward, they told me I was going to the delivery room, and my husband actually stayed back and asked the dog. And he's like, you go on with your mom. I'll be right there. And I was like, where are you going? Like, you got to go get a big gulp. Like, what's going on? Like, what do you mean? Like, so of course I'm like in this emotional state, and I'm looking back at him like, what are you doing? But come to find out later, he was back there bargaining with the doctor, because he was like, could you just knock her out? Like, and give her a surgery. Don't make her go through labor, please. And I don't, to have to do that and know that your baby's not going to live. I don't know how she can do that. And the doctor's like, one, legally, I can't, I have to do what's best for her, and I can't give her a surgery for this right now. And he said, because it's not totally necessary for her. And two, I can't rob you of that experience and that emotional experience. And we didn't understand that at the time. It probably took a good month or two to fully grasp that, but he was right. We needed that. We needed that time for grieving. We needed that time for connection. We needed that time with our son.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, we went back to the delivery room, and a few hours later, Tate Christopher was born.
Wow.
And he went to heaven that same day.
Beautiful name.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
It's got to be so incredibly difficult to carry a baby to that point. And you've got all these future plans. You know, you're anticipating what that child's life is going to be like, and what your life's going to be like with them. And
and your identity, like, hey, I'm a mom now. This is who I'm going to be. This is what I've always wanted.
Yeah. And all of that changes in a moment. And nobody's ready for that. No,
nobody can be ready.
Right.
For that. No. And in that moment, I think back, it's interesting. Like I said, that the just delivery room and that experience for us was really holy moments.
Sure.
As hard as they were holy. And I look back to it, and we had friends that came and visited. Like, God gave us time, the gift of time. And that at one point we looked out the window, and I have the pictures somewhere. I should find them. But we looked out the window, and there was this big rainbow.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. A big rainbow. And we took a picture of it, and just in recognition that, hey, this moment is really hard, but in some way there's going to be hope. And I wanted to cling to that in that moment, because I didn't know what else to cling to. And again, you're kind of out of body. Like, you don't know exactly what to do or how to feel. So you're swinging from complete devastation to hope, and back and forth and back and forth. It's not rational.
No, it's not. You really can't apply logic or rationale to something like that. We've experienced that. And so I completely understand what you're saying. I know that there are a lot of people listening today that can identify with what you're saying. So let me ask you this. I know that you never had a chance really to get to know Tate, but you did grieve nevertheless. So before losing Tate and after you guys lost him, what were your views of grief going prior to him and after losing him? What did that look like for you? Because I think we all have our preconceived ideas of what deep grief is like, but when we experience it, often that changes pretty dramatically.
Yeah, I think I didn't have any concept for it. My grandparents were still living, all of them. In fact, one of my grandparents lived about 6 or 7 hours from us, and the second they heard that this was all going on, they got in the car and they were on their way to come be with us. Like, so I hadn't had a lot of loss in my life. And when things had gone like in a direction that was difficult, they seemed to always work out somehow. And so for me, I didn't really have any concept of it. My husband had grown up in a loving home, but there had definitely been some things that he had worked through with grief in a different way. And so for him, the grieving was different. And I think part of that is personality and part of that is his upbringing. But yeah, for me, the idea of grief before was that you just pray and then God just takes care of it. And you don't have to grieve because it'll just work out. And I learned really quick that even if you love Jesus, hard things still happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. He did tell us that in this world you will have trouble.
You will have
But
trouble.
for some reason, but we don't. For some reason, we live as though that's not the case until we experience something like that. I think a lot of people do understand that that grieving is a very deep emotional experience. It has a deeply emotional impact and very traumatic. But I think what a lot of people don't understand, and I think this is probably especially true when a couple or a parent loses a child, and that there's also a very deep impact physically and mentally and spiritually.
Yeah.
So would you speak to that if you don't mind, Sarah, from your own personal experience and what you've learned over the years?
Well, I think the first thing that you have to recognize is that when people talk about the process of grief, it really is a process. And it's not a journey that you're just going to walk through and be done with.
Right.
And it looks very unique to each person.
Indeed.
And so I didn't understand that fully at the time. But for me personally, like I said, there was a lot of swinging emotionally and spiritually. One moment being fully in trust with God and one moment being fully angry. Back and forth and back and forth. And so I'd want to be with people and then I would isolate and then I would want somebody to come over and then I would then I would call and tell them not to because I didn't want anyone around. There was a lot of that. When you're going through grief, the natural desire often is to isolate. And so for me, having close people in my life that could call that out and bring me out of isolation when they saw it was really helpful. But gosh, I remember, and I don't know how long because as much as it's like a movie, all the timelines seem to like meld together. So it could have been a couple weeks later. My husband went back to work for the first time and my parents had left. They had been here for a long time. So it might've been, a few weeks after. And I remember being curled up in the corner of my walk-in closet in hysterics and could not believe that my husband would go back to work. Like how, and he's like, we have to pay for the house and the food and stuff. But I just thought like, how callous are you that you could just go back to work? And he's looking at me going, how crazy are you that you think that we can't? And so, being willing to just allow myself to have those moments of complete breakdown and then recognize that, like I said before, when we aren't willing to feel the feelings, we're masking it. It's going to come out at some point. And so for me, being willing to go to those depths and recognize now it's different, but then I didn't understand this. I think part of what was scary about going to those depths was I didn't know if I could come back from them.
That could be a very scary place to be because, naturally, nobody really wants to embrace that kind of trauma and the kind of emotions that it creates. Because like you said, it's a roller coaster. You have to, at some point, you realize that there's a certain amount of this that I've just got to walk through. And yes, we can't talk about enough of the importance of community in your life. Those people that you can really lean on and that'll just listen, that'll just be there for you.
Yeah. And recognizing that there was a close group of honest people. I remember having a conversation with one of my friends and I was like, I love the name Tate so much. This is what I wanted my son to be named. If I ever have another child, I'm going to name them Tate too. And I remember in her kindness, she goes, no, you're not. You're not going to do that. And I'm like, why? And she goes, because that would be weird. And I was like, oh. And she said it in a kindness. After a while, she goes, here's why. And for anyone that has actually done that, there's no judgment. But for her, she's like, we've all honored him in such a way, and we love him so much, and we would want whoever you had next to have their own identity. Like, and you're possibly saying it out of grief because you're still holding on so tightly.
Of course.
And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. And she goes, if you choose to do that, I will support you. She goes, but I think right now you're not thinking. And she was right. I wasn't. And we can look back and chuckle at it now. I remember taking so many photos of Tate, so many photos. I would show them to anybody that would look at them. And I am sure that it was super awkward for some people. Like, I'm showing them pictures, and I can say it now without the emotion as tied, but I'm showing them pictures of my dead baby. Yeah. And that's awkward and weird for some people. But I had people that were caring and kind and loving that just allowed me to be at whatever place I was. Didn't expect me to be more emotionally put together than I was at that moment, but loved me back into who they knew I was prior and who God was creating me to be in this new season.
Man,
and
I was just going to say
go ahead, sorry.
Man, how incredibly blessed you were to have friends like that in your life who were willing to be uncomfortable for a few minutes potentially.
And I'm sure, I mean, those are just the little ones that I remember. I'm sure there were many more, but for us, having a church community, having counselors, medical professionals, mentors and coaches that could spur me on to what was next in my life, to give me hope, to look forward to something else. Because I think that's something that's, the grief can become the number one thing. And we start living for the grief. It actually becomes the motivator for us, and is like a huge weighted blanket that feels scary. Like, if I let this grief go, who am I?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that sometimes people get stuck there. Often they can't get past the death. And I think sometimes when we stay there, there is a mental health disorder now known as prolonged grief disorder. And I'm sure that you're very well acquainted with that. And so what we hope to do by doing what we're doing today is to let people in to understand that there is hope on that grief journey. And if you can if you can start getting glimmers of hope, then you can start making that turn from a focus on death to a focus on your child's life and what that child meant to you, what your child meant to other people, and you can start celebrating their life.
Yeah. I mean, at the beginning, Greg, that looked like I remember every night at 11:21 p.m. when he was born, I would set my alarm for weeks, and I would be up until that moment. And so just to get real raw about what does that grief look like for people and how do you move through it? I just let myself do those things, knowing that wasn't going to happen forever, but I needed that in that moment. I wrote him letters. I still have them in my side dresser drawer. I remember celebrating his life we still do in different ways, but that first year on his birthday, on his due date, there were things like that were really important. I had a bracelet made that had his name and birthday on it. I had a shadow box that I made with all of the things from the hospital. So little things like that were memorable that I could hold on to were really important to me in those moments of healing, and inviting God into those, inviting him into those spaces. We had it wasn't a service. It was more of just a moment of prayer with our family and some very close friends with Tate in the hospital. And for us, we didn't feel like we wanted anything else at that point. But for some other people that I've walked with along this, having a funeral or having a space where they can go and visit. We had Tate cremated, and I wanted to keep his ashes here at our home with us. That was really important to me in the moment. For others, they want a place to go and visit. So individually, what really identifying, hey, what is it that's going to be helpful to you, and not second guessing it, just doing it. What is it that you need today? What is that first step that you need to take? And being willing to do that. And if you're walking with somebody with grief, I'd say, oh gosh, just let them be who they are, where they are today.
Yeah, and not worrying so much about what you think other people might think about how you're processing that grief, because you and I both know there really is no right or wrong way to grieve, while there are certainly healthy and unhealthy ways. But people grieve differently, and those little things like you were just talking about can be so important on that healing process, whether it be, on their first birthday afterwards, releasing balloons up into the air, or celebrating with a birthday cake, or whatever it might be. If those are meaningful to you as a parent or to you as a family, then do that.
Yeah. And I would say leave the worrying to medical professionals.
Amen.
If you have a concern, encourage the person to go talk to a counselor or to a doctor, or that's going to be the best help that you can give them, or to a pastor or a coach or a mentor. Voicing your concerns is not going to help. What did help was when I remember my mom at one point was like, hey, we're going to go shopping today. I remember thinking, that's really weird. I don't have any, why would I even need anything? I don't want to eat. My baby's dead. I don't need to go buy anything. And my mom knew I just needed to take a shower and get out of the house. It didn't matter where I was going to go. I don't even know if she really needed the things that she said we
probably
had to go
not.
get. But no, probably not. But she just in her wisdom knew, hey, she needs to get out and then do something. So if you can find an excuse to get that person to take a shower and get out of the house, buy them a massage, take them for a pedicure, understand that dads grieve differently too.
Yeah.
Like Todd was grieving, but he grieved very differently for me. And I would say for spouses, recognizing that your spouse can't read your mind, especially in a season that you've never walked before, and that you're going to have to be really specific on what you need and want.
It's important to grieve together.
And, it is, but it's important to grieve together, but it's also important to give each other the space to grieve differently, and not make one of them right or one of them wrong. If one of you is curled up in the bottom of your closet in hysterics, that's okay. And if one of you is like, hey, I've got to keep going and I'm going to work this grief out in a different way through groups or talks with friends or prayer with God, that's okay too. And then coming back together to grieve together as well. Yeah, is important.
Spouses need to give each other space and freedom.
Yes.
Because we do. Yeah, because we do grieve differently. And men and women absolutely do grieve differently. As traumatic as losing a child is, and it is, it's an unspeakable tragedy, because it's not the expected. It's out of the natural order. Parents are supposed to go first, not the child.
Correct.
And so we've talked about how you walk through this season that's very difficult and traumatic, and you find yourself almost not knowing who you are any longer. Your identity, wrestle with your identity and knowing what life is going to be like. So where along the line did you feel like you could see God putting some of those broken pieces back together and leading you to a point of finding meaning again and plugging into your purpose?
To try to pinpoint a day would be tough. I remember going back to work the first day and being like, this is all meaningless. Why are we even talking about this? My baby's dead. And so it took a little bit, because spiritually, Greg, at that moment, I could tell you that I believed in God. But honestly, that was part of the problem. I mean, if God didn't exist, then the world could just suck.
Yeah.
And this would just be part of that suckiness of the world. But if God existed and he didn't step in and intervene, why?
Yeah.
Like, why not? Why not for me? Did I do something wrong? And so I had to wrestle with a lot of those things and come to understand, though, in the moment, I believed God could do good things for other people. It took a really long time before I started to believe again that he didn't just want good things for others. He wanted good things for me too. And so that was a daily process. That was a daily surrender, a daily being willing to ask the questions and not be afraid to present those to God and allow him to work on my heart. I will say that there was a big part of healing that happened when our son Lincoln was born, about a year and a half later. And that isn't always, Lincoln's not a replacement of Tate by any means. And that wasn't easy. I mean, Lincoln was born 2 months early. He was a preemie in the NICU. And so that was a whole nother journey in a different way. But for each of us, I think whether it's finding a project that helps propel purpose and life. I mean, similarly for you, Greg, what you're doing now, bringing hope to so many people through the hardship. There is things that God calls us to. And as we keep stepping forward, those things that we've become faithful to, he starts to redeem our hearts and our hope again, and starts to bring that back and allows us to see that though we're living in this imperfect world, that he can still take the imperfections and the questions and the hurt and can use it to bring hope to others, and through that bring healing to us too.
I agree. And I think a big part of that too, and I think you would agree, is that, and I think I've heard you say this throughout our conversation, is that we have to make intentional choices. It's we can't move forward based on how we feel at any given time. Sometimes we just have to make the hard choice to do something, like you said, get up, get a shower, do the things that we have to do just in our daily life, even though it feels crummy and it feels like, why, what's the point? But as we do that, I think as we make those choices, we lean into God, we allow other people into our lives to walk with us, I think the emotions follow.
They do. And it doesn't mean they always go away, but it does mean that they, they're going to come in waves. And I like to say that for people too. If you've never heard this, grief comes in waves. And what happens is, if you're willing to ride the wave, eventually you're going to get back to the shore and it's going to be okay. But if you try to stand really strong in front of that wave and pretend it's not there, you're going to get knocked down. And if you just go under, you're going to go under. Like it's just going to consume you. And so making that conscious choice, something that I wish I would have known this tool back then, but something I created with some of my clients and I see that's helpful is the daily percentage. Recognizing, hey, what percent do I have to give today? Like what effort percent? And it might be 5%. Yeah. I might only have 5% to give today, but God tells us that he's going to give us what we need. And so allowing others to walk into that space and presenting it to God. So if I only have 5% today, my responsibility is to do my very best with that 5%, and then to ask God to come in and take care of the 95 through other people or through his strength. And then to keep a daily record of what my percentage is each day, because asking someone if they're having a good or bad day when they're in grief, all the days feel bad. They can't tell you. That feels bad. It feels weird to even say, well, today's a good day. It's not a good day. It doesn't feel good. So having that percentage is helpful, because maybe the next day you have 15%. Maybe one day you had 80%. And you can go back to that and see, okay, hey, healing is happening. It's going to take a while and it's a journey, but I can see movement without being able to go back and look at those incremental changes. It's hard to sometimes see the movement.
Yeah, that's good. And that is so incredibly accurate. So, Sara, there may be somebody who's listening today that is identifying with things that you're saying, and that maybe they're thinking, gosh, maybe if I had somebody like a Sara in my life, maybe I could start moving forward, and maybe the healing process might speed up a little bit, or maybe I'd feel stuck, and I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. Are you in a place where you're still taking new patients or clients?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, definitely. Have given my heart and life to what I feel called to, which is walking alongside people in what I identify is the messy middle of life.
That's good.
There's these messy middle moments that sometimes are in our careers, sometimes are in our relationships. They're most definitely in trauma or loss and grief. And so, if people are walking in those moments and they're confused, or they, it just feels overwhelming and they don't know how to take the step forward, but they desperately want change. They don't want to be where they are anymore, and they're willing to put in the effort to go forward. My heart's calling is to come alongside them and to work with them in that way. And so the best way to get a hold of me is just to go to saraemmerson.com.
Okay.
And you can sign up for a free consultation, and we get to have a chat and get to help figure out, is this the best next step for you? And that's what I do on a weekly, daily basis. Today, I started with 2 new clients. And so this week, I have a few other appointments with people that have signed up. So anyone that wants to, I'm always willing to have that conversation with them. You can also follow me on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Okay. Sorry, I always forget all the different ones.
That's great. Yeah. And I will have a link on your episode so that if someone maybe didn't write that down, but they're interested, just check that out on Sara's episode. So Sara, I just want to thank you again for carving time out of your schedule to be our guest today. It has been such a delight to have you.
Thank you, Greg. And it's so honoring to be in this space with you, because I know, not firsthand, but from what I have been told and heard about your story, just the incredible work that you're doing, walking alongside families and even bringing these stories to them through your story. And so thank you for the grief work that you've done, how you've paved the way to show people that it's possible to have hope on the other side of loss again, and that healing is possible. And it doesn't mean that you get rid of any of the thoughts or memories or the honor of that person, but it does mean that you carry them with you. And you're such a great champion of that for people and for parents. And I'm grateful to sit in this
Well, thank you, Sara. That's very kind. And we'll just direct all of that credit to the Lord. How about that?
Yeah, definitely. I hear that. Me too.
Thank you again, Sara. If you find our podcast meaningful, we invite you to follow us so that you can automatically receive the latest episodes. Also, we'd like to invite you to contact us and talk with us about sharing your story on a future episode, because every story is important and matters to God. Please reach out via email at hope@emptychairendeavor.com. That's hope@emptychairendeavor.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening